大家好啊，又到讀你聽嘅時間。咁今日我哋繼續讀 A.Christie 嘅450 from Paddington 啦。咁讀到第15節啦。咁上一回14節呢，就講到呢個身在法國嘅 Craddock 啦。咁訪問咗呢個芭蕾舞團嘅團主啦。咁問到關於Martine嘅在生時候嘅一啲資訊啦嚇。咁仲有啲咩呢？就係之後翻嚟呢個英國，咁就揾咗 Craddock 家族嘅事務律師啦，佢哋嘅家庭律師啦嚇，呢個 Wimborne 啦 ，Mr. Wimborne 啦。咁Wimborne 亦都透露咗俾佢聽，即係呢一個家族入面嗰幾兄弟，都並唔係佢哋表現出嚟咁樣嘅，即係實際上Wimborne 咧點樣睇佢哋咧？Wimborne 有自己一套睇法嘅，尤其是Harold 啦，即係話其實佢都唔係咩成功商人啊，仲可能爭落好多錢添咁樣。諸如此類啦，咁樣。咁Emma 咧就比較上就佢嗰個人物嘅呢個可疑度咧就比較上低啊，暫時比較上低。咁起碼作者呈現出嚟嘅係咁啦。Craddock 係咪咁諗就另外一件事。Craddock 好似暫時將佢嘅懷疑係擺喺呢個Brian Wesley 嗰度嘅，即係呢個佢哋嘅 Craddock 家族嘅女婿身上咁樣。咁接落嚟呢個案情有啲咩發展呢？呢個 Craddock 繼續查案啦，定係會揾Miss Marple 出嚟幫手呢？我哋繼續睇下佢好冇？好 ，Chapter 15。
Inspector Craddock had made an appointment with Harold Craddock at his office, and he and Sergeant Weatherall arrived there punctually. The office was on the 4th floor of a big block of city offices. Inside, everything showed prosperity, an acme of modern business taste. A neat young woman took his name, spoke in a discreet murmur through a telephone, and then, rising, showed them into Harold Craddock's own private office. Harold was sitting behind a large leather-topped desk and was looking as impeccable and self-confident as ever. If, as the inspector's private knowledge led him to surmise, he was close upon Queer Street, no trace of it showed. He looked up with a frank, welcome interest. "Good morning, Inspector Craddock. I hope this means that you have some definite news for us at last." "Hardly that, I'm afraid, Mr. Craddock. It's just a few more questions I'd like to ask." "More questions? Surely by now we have answered everything imaginable." "I dare say it feels like that to you, Mr. Craddock, but it's just a question of our regular routine." "Well, what is it this time?" He spoke impatiently. "I should be glad if you could tell me exactly what you were doing on the afternoon and evening of 20th December last, say between the hours of 3 p.m. and midnight." Harold Craddock went an angry shade of plum red. "That seems to be a most extraordinary question to ask me. What does it mean, I should like to know?" Craddock smiled gently. "It just means that I should like to know where you were between the hours of 3 p.m. and midnight on Friday, 20th December. "Why? It would help to narrow things down." "Narrow them down? You have extra information then." "We hope that we are getting a little closer, sir." "I'm not at all sure that I ought to answer your question. Not, that is, without having my solicitor present." "That, of course, is entirely up to you," said Craddock. "You are not bound to answer any questions, and you have a perfect right to have a solicitor present before you do so." "You are not, let me be quite clear, warning me in any way?" Oh, no, sir. Inspector Craddock looked properly shocked. Nothing of that kind. The questions I'm asking you, I'm asking several other people as well. There's nothing directly personal about this. It's just a matter of necessary eliminations. Well, of course, I'm anxious to assist in any way I can. Let me see now. Such a thing isn't easy to answer offhand, but we're very systematic here. Miss Alice, I expect, can help. He spoke briefly into one of the telephones on his desk, and almost immediately a streamlined young woman in a well-cut black suit entered with a notebook. My secretary, Miss Alice, Inspector Craddock. Now, Miss Alice, the inspector would like to know what I was doing on the afternoon and evening of, what was the date? Friday, 20th December. Friday, 20th December. I expect you will have some record? We have some record? Oh, yes. Miss Alice left the room, returned with an office memorandum calendar and turned the pages. You were in the office on the morning of 20th December. You had a conference with Mr. Goldie about the Cromartie merger. You lunched with Lord Forfield at the Berkeley. It was that day, yes. You returned to the office about 3 o'clock and dictated half a dozen letters. You then left to attend Sotheby's sales rooms, where you were interested in some rare manuscripts which were coming up for sale that day. You did not return to the office again, but I have a note to remind you that you were attending the catering club dinner that evening. She looked up interrogatively. Thank you, Miss Alice. Miss Alice glided from the room. That is all quite clear in my mind, said Harold. I went to Sotheby's that afternoon, but the items I wanted there went for too high a price. I had tea in a small place in Jermyn Street, Russell's, I think it was called. I dropped into a news theatre for about half an hour or so, then went home. I live at 43 Cardigan Gardens. The catering club dinner took place at 7:30 at Caterers Hall, and after it, I returned home to bed. I think that should answer your questions. That's all very clear, Mr. Quackenthorpe. What time was it when you returned home to dress? I don't think I can remember exactly. Soon after 6, I should think. And after your dinner? It was, I think, 11:30 when I got home. Did your manservant let you in? Or perhaps Lady Alice Quackenthorpe? My wife, Lady Alice, is abroad in the south of France and has been since early December. I let myself in with my latchkey. So there is no one who can vouch for you returning home when you say you did. Harold gave him a cold stare. I dare say the servants heard me come in. I have a man and wife. But really, Inspector, please, Mr. Quackenthorpe, I know these kind of questions are annoying, but I have nearly finished. Do you own a car? Yes, a Humber Hawk. You drive it yourself? Yes, I don't use it much except at weekends. Driving in London is quite impossible nowadays. I presume you use it when you go down to see your father and sister in Blackhampton? Not unless I'm going to stay there for some length of time. If I just go down for the night, as for instance to the inquest the other day, I always go by train. There is an excellent train service and it is far quicker than going by car. The car my sister hires meets me at the station. Where do you keep your car? I rent a garage in the mews behind Cardigan Gardens. Any more questions? I think that's all for now, said Inspector Craddock, smiling and rising. I'm very sorry to have to bother you. When they were outside, Sergeant Weatherall, a man who lived in a state of dark suspicions of all and sundry, remarked meaningly. He didn't like those questions, didn't like them at all. Put out, he was. If you have not committed a murder, it naturally annoys you if it seems someone thinks that you have, said Inspector Craddock mildly. It would particularly annoy an ultra-respectable man like Harold Quackenthorpe. There's nothing in that. What we've got to find out now is if anyone actually saw Harold Quackenthorpe at a sale that afternoon, and the same applies to the tea shop place. He could easily have travelled by the 4:33, pushed the woman out of the train and caught a train back to London in time to appear at the dinner. In the same way, he could have driven his car down that night, moved the body to the sarcophagus and driven back again, making inquiries in the mews. Yes, sir. Do you think that's what he did do? How do I know? Asked Inspector Craddock. He is a tall, dark man. He could have been on that train, and he's got a connection with Rutherford Hall. He's a possible suspect in this case. Now for Brother Alfred. Alfred Crackenthorpe had a flat in West Hampstead, in a big modern building of slightly jerry-built type, with a large courtyard in which the owners of flats parked their cars with a certain lack of consideration for others. The flat was the modern building type, evidently rented furnished. It had a long plywood table that led down from the wall, a divan bed, and various chairs of improbable proportions. Alfred Crackenthorpe met them with engaging friendliness, but was, the inspector thought, nervous. "I'm intrigued," he said. "Can I offer you a drink, Inspector Craddock?" He held up various bottles invitingly. "No, thank you, Mr. Crackenthorpe." "As bad as that?" He laughed at his own little joke, then asked what it was all about. Inspector Craddock said his little piece. "What was I doing on the afternoon and evening of 20th December? How should I know?" "Why, that's over 3 weeks ago." "Your brother Harold has been able to tell us very exactly." "Brother Harold, perhaps. Not Brother Alfred," he added with a touch of something, envious malice possibly. "Harold is the successful member of the family, busy, useful, fully employed, a time for everything, and everything at that time. Even if he were to commit a murder, shall we say, it would be carefully timed and exact." "Any particular reason for using that example?" "Oh no, it just came into my mind as a supreme absurdity. Now about yourself." Alfred spread out his hands. "It's as I tell you, I have no memory for times or places. If you were to say Christmas Day now, then I should be able to answer you. There's a peg to hang it on. I know where I was Christmas Day. We spent that with my father at Brackhampton. I really don't know why. He grumbles at the expense of having us, and would grumble that we never came near him if we didn't come. We really do it to please my sister." "And you did it this year?" "Yes, but unfortunately your father was taken ill, was he not?" Craddock was pursuing a sideline deliberately, led by the kind of instinct that often came to him in his profession. "He was taken ill, living like a sparrow in that glorious cause of economy. Sudden full eating and drinking had its effect." "That was all it was it?" "Of course. What else?" "I gathered that his doctor was worried." "Ah, that old fool Quimper." Alfred spoke quickly and scornfully. "It's no use listening to him, Inspector. He's an alarmist of the worst kind." "Indeed, he seemed a rather sensible kind of man to me." "He's a complete fool. Father's not really an invalid. There's nothing wrong with his heart, but he takes in Quimper completely. Naturally, when father really fell ill, he made a terrific fuss, and had Quimper going and coming, asking questions, going into everything he'd eaten and drunk. The whole thing was ridiculous." Albert spoke with unusual heat. Craddock was silent for a moment or two, rather effectively. Alfred fidgeted, shot him a quick glance, and then said petulantly, "Well, what is all this? Why do you want to know where I was on a particular Friday 3 or 4 weeks ago?" "So you do remember that it was a Friday?" "I thought you said so." "Perhaps I did," said Inspector Craddock. "At any rate, Friday 20th is the day I'm asking about." "Why?" "A routine inquiry." "That's nonsense. You found out something more about this woman, about where she came from?" "Our information is not yet complete." Alfred gave him a sharp glance. "I hope you're not being led aside by this wild theory of Emma's that she might have been my brother Edmund's widow. That's complete nonsense." "This Martine did not at any rate apply to you?" "To me? Good Lord, no! That would have been a laugh." "She would be more likely, you think, to go to your brother Harold?" "Much more likely. His name's frequently in the papers. He's well off. Trying a touch there wouldn't surprise me. Not that she should have got anything. Harold's as tight-fisted as the old man himself. Emma, of course, is the soft-hearted one of the family, and she was Edmund's favorite sister. All the same, Emma isn't credulous. She was quite alive to the possibility of this woman being phony. She had it all laid on for the entire family to be there, and a hard-headed solicitor as well. Very wise, said Craddock. Was there a definite date fixed for this meeting? It was to be soon after Christmas, the weekend of the 27th. He stopped. Ah, said Craddock pleasantly. So I see some dates having a meaning to you. I've told you no definite date was fixed. But you talked about it. When? I really can't remember. And you can't tell me what you yourself was doing on Friday, 20th December? Sorry, my mind's an absolute blank. You don't keep an engagement book? Can't stand the things. The Friday before Christmas. It shouldn't be too difficult. I played golf one day with a likely prospect. Alfred shook his head. No, that was the week before. I probably just moosh around. I spend a lot of my time doing that. I find one's business gets done in bars more than anywhere else. Perhaps the people here, or some of your friends, may be able to help? Maybe I'll ask them. Do what I can. Everett seemed more sure of himself now. I can't tell you what I was doing that day, he said, but I can tell you what I wasn't doing. I wasn't murdering anyone in the long barn. Why should you say that, Mr. Crackenthorpe? Come now, my dear Inspector. You're investigating this murder, aren't you? And when you begin to ask, where were you on such and such a day and such a time, you're narrowing down things. I'd very much like to know why you've hit on Friday the 20th between, what, lunchtime and midnight? It couldn't be medical evidence. Not after all this time. Did somebody see the deceased sneaking into the barn at that afternoon? She went in and she never came out, etc. Is that it? The sharp black eyes were watching him narrowly, but Inspector Craddock was far too old a hand to react to that sort of a thing. I'm afraid we'll have to let you guess about that, he said pleasantly. The police are so secretive. Not only the police, I think, Mr. Crackenthorpe. You could remember what you were doing on that Friday if you tried. Of course, you may have reasons for not wishing to remember. You won't catch me that way, Inspector. It's very suspicious, of course, very suspicious indeed, that I can't remember. But there it is. Wait a minute now. I went to Leeds that week, stayed at a hotel close to the town hall. Can't remember his name, but you find it easy enough. That might have been on the Friday. We'll check up, said the inspector unemotionally. He rose. I'm sorry that you couldn't have been more cooperative, Mr. Crackenthorpe. Most unfortunate for me. There's Cedric with a safe alibi in Ibiza, and Harold, no doubt, checked with business appointments and public dinners every hour, and here I am with no alibi at all. Very sad, and all so silly. I've already told you that I don't murder people, and why should I murder an unknown woman anyway? What for? Even if the corpse is the corpse of Edmund's widow, why should any of us wish to do away with her? Now, if she'd been married to Harold in the war and has suddenly reappeared, then it might have been awkward for a respectable Harold, bigamy and all that. But Edmund, why we'd all have enjoyed making father stump up a bit to give her an allowance and send a boy to a decent school. Father would have been wild, but he couldn't in decency refuse to do something. Would you have a drink before you go, Inspector Shaw? Too bad. I haven't been able to help you. Sir, listen, do you know what? Inspector Craddock looked at his excited sergeant. Yes, Wetherall, what is it? I placed him, sir, that chap. All the time I was trying to fix it, and suddenly it came. He was mixed up in that tinned food business with Dickie Rogers. Never got anything on him. Too cagey for that. And he's been in with one or more of the Soho lot. Watches and that Italian sovereign business. Of course. Craddock realized now why Alfred's face had seemed vaguely familiar from the first. It had all been small-time stuff, never anything that could be proved. Alfred had always been on the outskirts of the racket with a plausible, innocent reason for having been mixed up in it and all. But the police had been quite sure that a small, steady profit came his way. That throws rather a light on things, Craddock said. Think he did it? I should have said he was the type to do murder, but it explains other things, the reason why he couldn't come up with an alibi. Yes, that looked bad for him. Not really, said Craddock. It's quite a clever line, just to say firmly you can't remember. Lots of people can't remember what they did and where they were even a week ago. It's especially useful if you don't particularly want to call attention to the way you spend your time. Interesting rendezvous at lorry pull-ups with the Dickie Rogers crowd, for instance. So you think he's all right? I'm not prepared to think anyone's all right just yet, said Inspector Craddock. You've got to work on it, Redderall. Back at his desk, Craddock sat frowning and making little notes on the pad in front of him. Murderer, he wrote, a tall, dark man. Victim, could have been Martine, Edmund, Krakenthorpe's girlfriend or widow. Or, could have been Anna Stravinska. Went out of circulation at appropriate time, right age and appearance, clothing, etc. No connections with Rutherford Hall as far as is known. Could be Harold's first wife, bigamy. First mistress, blackmail. If connection with Alfred, might be blackmail. Had knowledge that could have sent him to jail. If Cedric, might have had connections with him abroad, Paris, Balearics. Or victim could be Anna S. posing as Martine. Or victim is a known woman killed by an unknown murderer. And most probably the latter, said Craddock aloud. He reflected gloomily on the situation. You couldn't get far with a case until you had the motive. All the motives suggested so far seemed either inadequate or far-fetched. Now, if only it had been the murderer of old Mr. Krakenthorpe. Plenty of motive there. Something stirred in his memory. He made further notes on his pad. Ask Dr. Q about Christmas illness. Cedric, alibi. Consult Miss M for the latest gossip.
咁啊，一段好精彩嘅查案咁啊，先後就係兩位嫌疑者啦 ，Harold 啦，同埋呢個 Alfred 啦，兩兄弟啦。咁佢哋嗰個性格反應都係截然不同嘅。一個就係好清楚自己做咗啲乜嘅，亦都有秘書幫佢做記錄嘅。另一個咧就係會話俾你聽，我唔記得，唔好教啲咁嘅嘢啦咁樣。咁然之後就係Craddock 終於知道咗呢個 Alfred 咧，佢本身咧都係做嗰啲不法嘅勾當噶啦，不過咧只不過係冇確實嘅證據起訴佢咁解嘅啫。咁懷疑佢喺案發嘅時候會唔會都係做緊呢啲勾當咧，所以就扮唔記得咧，就唔想講咧咁樣。咁而最後最有趣咧就係作者咧就將呢個 Craddock 嘅佢嘅 notes 同我哋分享喎。咁雖然都係啲好簡單嘅 notes，但係都算係一個summary 啦，到目前為止一個小總結啦，係嘛？咁佢會講呢個兇手一個高一個黑嘅人，一個男性死者會唔會係 Martine 呢？會唔會係 Anna Stravinska 呢？會唔會係 Anna Stravinska 扮成 Martine 呢？會唔會係根本係我哋唔識嘅女人俾一個唔識嘅兇手殺咗呢？然之後 Craddock 就話好可能係最尾佢咁講咧，就會令到讀者更加疑惑啦，更加咁究竟係乜嘢啊咁樣。咁當然聰明嘅讀者就應該自己用腦諗啦，係咪？咁我呢一刻都係仍然係覺得我唔知點解，我都係覺得 Emma 係有關聯啦。仲有啲咩咧？差唔多呢度啦，亦都有預告咗啦。呢一節嘅最尾就係要呢個 Craddock 會揾 Dr. Quimper 啦，問關於呢個老先生呢個老先生佢喺聖誕節嗰陣時候嘅病情啦。因為老先生如果佢係俾人謀殺嘅先至合情合理啊，點解會殺一個女人呢？咁樣。咁然之後就係要問 Cedric 啦，仲要問下 Cedric 啦，同埋仲係要問下 Miss M 啦。Miss M 估計就應該就係 Miss Marple 啦。咁如果問得 Miss Marple 咧，就同 呢個 Lucy Sparrow 就離唔開關係啦。所以我相信下一節咧應該都會 Miss Marple 同 Lucy 都要再出場噶啦。OK， 咁今日就講到呢一度。臨走之前咧，同大家分享幾個字。Acme 第一個字 Acme 嘅意思咧，即係一個中文解釋就係一個極致啦。英文解釋就係一個 point of which something is at its peak and highly developed。highest develop 唔係 highly，highest 最極致最頂端。喺文中咧佢用呢個字去形容呢個 Harold 嘅辦公室嘅at the acme of modern business modern business taste， 即係話佢嗰個辦公室咧嗰個裝修啊，嗰個設備啊係時代嘅頂端一個極致跟住一個字 petulant文中就係 petulantly，OK， 意思即係一個 childishly sulky 啦，或者 bad tempered 啦，中文就會解做任性啦，好任性啦，偏向係形容孩子啦，或者用啲後生嘅人啦，任性啦。咁文中點樣用咧？就係當呢個 Alfred 去回應呢個 Craddock 嘅時候，做口供嘅時候，佢有一刻就係好 petulantly 咁樣去講，哎呀做咩啫？你問都係做咩啫？咁好似有啲率性，有啲將佢個性情流露咗出嚟啦。好，第三個 credulous 文中咧有一刻就形容呢個 Emma， 佢話應該係 Alfred 啦。Alfred 話 Emma 佢唔係 credulous， 佢係有懷疑過呢一個哥哥死鬼哥哥嘅老婆嘅可信性credulous 嘅意思咧就係其實就係輕信啦，容易信人啦。Having or showing too great a readiness to believe things 或者好 naive 啦，好容易相信人啦，輕信啦咁樣。好，今日分享到呢度，我哋下一節第16節再同大家分享，拜拜。